Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Glenn Lawrence, and I got a special guest. Now, you may have seen him on another show, okay? And that other show is well known. This is Mike, and he is one of the Iron Disciples. Mike, say hello to the people
Yeah,
of the
thanks for
world.
having me, Glenn. Pleasure to be here. It's been great to, we met somewhat recently, and it's been cool to hear your story and share our thoughts. I think we overlap and have a lot of similar thinking, so I think it's great that we can connect.
Yeah, no, it's awesome because in this space, it's really hard to navigate, especially with having a biblical worldview. You hear a lot of Christians, especially Christian men, talk negative about this space or red pill or anything along those lines, um, and you kind of are kind of already alienated from you know your church body because you're accepting a different understanding of intersexual dynamics, and the church tends to think that's blasphemy. You think it's not of God.
Yeah,
It's
it's off
saying,
limits.
yeah, it's something you should just trust God, and it's kind of hard to you can't really talk about it with people in church. And then you have popular Christians in this space really kind of combating and talking negative about the red pill and the things that Rollo writes about. So it's great to it's great to get connected with like-minded people that share the same biblical worldview, and also understand that God could use both science and his own impure wisdom to really help guys. And God uses all things. He says, I create all things for the good. So that means he will use everything, even the rational male, for the good.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we're at a time where we have access to data to help us make decisions, especially, the red pills primarily in kind of the mate selection area and how to run relationships and whatnot. And we have a lot of data on that now that is useful in selecting mates. And I think it's like, why not use it? And we see even amongst the Christian community, like divorce rates are not great.
No.
And the just saying you're a Christian today also doesn't say a whole lot.
Yeah.
So that label itself is kind of like such a wishy-washy term. So if you're looking for that, Christian spouse, you still got to do a lot of vetting. Just because they say they're a Christian, that doesn't actually say a whole lot today.
Yeah. Today, saying you're a Christian is like a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
It's almost like, yeah, I'm a Christian. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a Christian. My mom went to church. I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
Like it's like, you say it because that's what you used to go to church when you're on Christmas or on Easter. You saw a couple of the resurrection plays and about Jesus. You watched the what was it, the Mel Gibson movie,
Yeah.
and now Jesus. Like, there's more to it than that. And you know I think it's harder for guys to be Christian today as it is, but also trying to be a Christian husband according to what the church says compared to what the Bible says. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I think guys kind of just check out afterwards. They're just like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think they go into it. So, Rollo talks about the, being blue pilled conditioned. We're all growing up in this society. And so when you're going into a relationship or marriage with kind of the blue pill conditioning anyway, combine it with the church version of that, like you're kind of set up for you're set up for the happy wife, happy life mantra pretty much. And I think that's my view of growing up in the church. That's my experience of observing relationships, I would say, in the church, is kind of the template. And I think that turns a lot of Christian men pretty much into doormats in the end.
Yeah,
But
because
it's partially, at the end, it's their fault too, because it's kind of like an ignorance thing. And like we were talking about a bit too before we started live, was on frame. Like if they were to go
yeah.
into the relationship with the appropriate frame and leadership, headship role, things would probably be a little different.
Well, that brings up a good question. How should Christian men understand frame?
Yeah, I mean, that's we just, we can put a link to our podcast on that topic, because we actually just did one.
Oh,
And
awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely throw that link in there.
yeah, because it's an interesting, like, even myself, I'm 29. I'm not married, so this type of circumstance is not even something I've had to deal with. I only know it conceptually. You got the experience in actually dealing with a long-term relationship in that aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even for me, like, I discovered the RP and like the red pill ideas, probably 2.5, 3 years ago now. So for me, I'm still developing these ideas and understanding of them. And then actually enacting them is going to be another story. So I think from, Christians understanding frame, it really that's part, the red pill, rational male, a lot of these ideas at the basis, they're biblical foundations. Like as
Yeah,
far
they
as
do have biblical
the
foundations.
roles we have, who's in, the headship of the male, and that relationship between the man and the woman submitting to her husband and respecting him, and the wife, or the husband sacrificing and loving his wife. Like, these are very foundational things written in the Bible that apply today very much so. And if they're followed, I think, properly, you are in that appropriate frame to begin with.
I think, like, if I was going to say, break down how Christians should understand frame, how Christian men should understand frame. One, they have to understand that their frame, their key foundation in their frame, is their relationship with God, their relationship with
Their identity.
their identity. That's where they identify from. So right there, that's the cornerstone. That's the foundation. And knowing that they are going to be, Christ led, right? They're trying to be Christ like, and having their boundaries set up according to their, biblical worldview. Now, once they have that set up, that's the general basis of things, right?
Right.
That's the structure. Then when it comes to their relationship, if they're going to get married, they need to first become that man, right?
Yep.
Before they could get into a relationship. They need to be that godly man that is firm in his walk and is not going to be swayed, not going to fall to temptation from women, not going to fall temptation from a wife that's going to, like, whine and try to steer him this way if she's not in the right, she's not in line. And he has to be, at the end of the day, he has to be like, you know what, my relationship with God is more important than my relationship with you, woman.
Yep.
Right? That's where he has to be mentally.
And that, what do you think about the Christian kind of culture? Like, they get married so young, which I don't think in and of itself is a bad thing by any means. But I think from the man standpoint, we're not developed at 21 as a leader, especially in the culture today. I could see, like, years and years ago, like, I think we probably matured faster because we had to. But today, like, I couldn't imagine. Like, I went to, I think, 7 or 8 weddings when I was 21 in college, of,
Really?
being in that Christian kind of culture.
Whew.
And, they're all, this is about a decade later now, they're all still married, and I think it's fine. But I know if I got married then, like, I didn't understand what it meant to be a leader in the relationship. I didn't understand. Like, I was just average, you call him beta blue pill Christian dude. Like, I'd probably turn into what the happy life, happy wife, happy life mantra. So
Let me tell you,
um,
don't do that.
yeah,
That's where you fail. I've
yeah.
learned
So
I've learned
that's
that lesson.
part of the problem, I think, is a lot of these men are getting married so young in the Christian community. And like I said, it's not bad in and of itself, but it's bad when you're not prepared.
Yeah, it's it's like establishing your walk first, knowing that your relationship with God is above all else, right? And
Yeah.
then once you got that, once you're strong with that, because I like to think about like Philippians, right? What Paul writes, I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me. And people really take that scripture out
Oh
of
yeah.
context. All right. What he really meant was, I am content in all things because it's Christ who gives me strength. Because mind you, he was going through a lot of things at that time,
Yep.
you know? So when you realize that I am content in all things because it's Christ that gives me strength, meaning I'm content single, I'm content married, I am content, by myself, I'm content in a group of friends. I am content no matter what situation I'm in because it's Christ that gives me strength. So understanding that, right, that should be part of their frame, knowing that with a woman, without a woman, they're good.
Hmm.
Right. And I don't think a lot of young guys, they're not taught that. They're taught that, like, hey, guess what? You know what? You're a man now. Okay, you got to get a job. Okay, now you got to find yourself a good Christian woman. And now you got to have kids and be a good father. And and they're young, as you said, 21 years old. You're right. Maybe years before they were able to do that because they had to grow up faster. They had to mature faster. There was wars going on. There's a lot more wars going on back then than they are now. We had
Hmm.
World War One, World War Two, Korean War. There's war after war after war. We had made our young men grow up really fast,
Right.
and they had to. Nowadays, we have pacified our kids and our young boys, and have coddled them to the point where they're not growing up until their 40s, in the mid 30s.
Exactly.
And they're not able to be that guy yet.
And
So I
I think
think you're
that's,
right there.
I think that's part of it too, is recognizing, like, I've been telling the younger men we have a men's group as well that meets bi-weekly. And so we got quite a few young guys in there that are like early 20s, and of course they're, wanting to find their wife right now. And I'm like, if you I'm like, I kind of explained to them the Rolo's kind of sexual market value graph. I'm like, is you as a man, you keep growing until like your mid 30s, and you peak then. So I'm like, don't worry about that right now. Your young 20s, if don't like completely write off women right now, but just focus on building who you are, building that frame, building your relationship with God, and know that you're not on the same clock that women kind of are. And I think that's one thing that we get, that's another of the programming we get from society in general as men, is we're on the same kind of time clock as women. And that's not true.
Yeah, I want to point out Ruduko's message here. He goes, if you ever speak to people who are raised in very harsh places like war-torn countries or ex-Soviet villages, etc., they become adult much faster. I believe that because of the dynamics and where they live. I think your culture and everything kind of influences people. Out
Plus
here in
the,
America, we are very coddled and very pacified.
and I think in
Our
those
young men don't
places
have to go through that.
we general or people just generally fall into their gender roles.
Yeah.
And I think it's a luxury that we're living in. It's a what do you call it? Like the downside of our luxury life that we have in the first world is we can play with these ideas of gender and the roles, and because we're not in any sort of survival situation anymore.
Yeah,
And
we have our needs met and we don't have to. What's up, YB? We don't have to really worry about much. So
mhm,
we could worry about frivolous things, right?
very frivolous things.
We could worry about things that don't need it, that other people are not even thinking about because they're thinking about their basic needs, right? So
Yeah.
here's the question then, what about those young Christian guys? Like, how do we keep them, if they're, and the question I got last night was, how does a Christian guy, is a Christian guy supposed to remain abstinent in today's culture?
It's a good
And
question.
it is a good question because honestly, I don't think you could find very many young people that claim to, that are professed Christians and find them be virgins. Especially teenagers. I'm talking about from teenage up.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm not talking about young kids, but I'm talking from the teenagers up. I don't think you could find many young, people in their teens and older that are virgins.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I think that's one of those things where, is what Jesus says, the way is narrow, and it's just more narrow living that life today. And especially, as a Christian, like in my head, I was estimating like what percent of do I think a Christian couple are actually like keeping it together in that area, and I was thinking like 10%. If I
Oh,
had to
I
be
think,
honest.
yeah, I think about
Especially
10%,
with
if not
especially with
less.
the culture, especially with the dating time frame that's expected out of culture. Like if you're having to wait like a year and a half or 2 years before you're like from dating, day 1 to marriage, like as my dad would say, like if they're able to do that, they must not like how attracted are they to each other? Um, or they just have some extreme boundaries that are really working. But I mean, I would always advocate obviously for it. I've lived my life that way. I've had to go separate ways with Christian girls over that topic because they weren't willing.
So
Um,
wait, let me get this straight, Mike. So you're a virgin,
yes, yes.
man. You more
I'm
power
I'm
to
one of the
you,
rare
'cause,
ones.
dude. I'm not even gonna lie. I don't even know how you do it. Like,
I
I'm like, well, how old are you? You're like 28,
29.
29. Okay, so I'm gonna be 39 this year. At your age, when I was a teenager, man, I don't know
See,
how.
I don't take the credit. Like I take circumstance. Like frankly, when I was younger, I was kind of a dopey kid. Like so, number one, I just didn't have any chance with girls until I was older, which I think does happen to a lot of men anyway.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they just kind of grow into themselves a lot better. And I was from small town Minnesota, and like just completely different atmosphere than probably big city public schools and whatnot. So my environment kind of allowed me to live the way I did. And then like in my college years, I got into a great Christian community, where that was just kind of the standard. And I always like from a young age, I had it drilled into my head on any women I would pursue, like I wanted them to share my values. So it's just kind of worked out for me that way.
No,
Is
that's
it easy?
awesome.
Do I, is it like, it's gotten harder for me now because like the options I've had with girls have expanded, and it just adds more temptation to it.
Oh yeah.
Um,
So do you run across that a lot? I mean, you're a good looking guy. You're in shape. You're young. You're fit. Like I'm pretty sure there's a lot of temptation thrown at your way.
yeah, I mean that's why for me to pursue a girl, she's gotta like I kind of lace just stuff out there right away on how I am,
Do
like
you
how
have
I
a
think.
really ridiculous standard?
Well, it depends what you define as ridiculous. I feel like if you're a
Well, I mean,
Christian
okay,
and just want abstinence,
with the modern woman, call it ridiculous.
yeah, definitely. Uh, but I think when you're dealing with trying to live the way God intended, you are kind of a unicorn in today's world. So regardless, your standards are ridiculous, but you're also holding yourself to quote ridiculous standards by the world's view anyway. Um, so I would uh I would say my standards probably went up more after learning the red pill, though. I
Mm.
was a little more lenient maybe before that, especially on the girls past.
Oh yeah, the church is
That
really big on preaching, like, you don't judge somebody from their past. They repented, they move forward. He who without sin, go ahead and cast the first stone, right?
yeah. And so yeah, you know, I've gotten into that conversation a lot lately, and the past is one thing that I still don't know like fully where my lines are at, especially when I've maintained what I've maintained. Is really hard for me to stomach a girl that's especially done the standard kind of like come back to Jesus when she's 29 thing, because a lot of those girls are the ones trying to talk to me. And so yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah. So, because like like the question the way I answered it to the guy that asked me, and I think his name was what's his name? Oh man, I forgot his name. I feel horrible. But the way I answered his question was like, well, regardless of what the culture does, if you believe in God and you believe that the Bible is his blueprint, his book for you guys to follow, then it doesn't matter what the world does. It doesn't matter what the culture's doing. You have to operate this way. Now, I can't say I did, and that I feel bad about that. I wish I would have. I probably would have had a lot less headaches with women in my life than I did. Um, and but I commend you for that, because that's a rarity. That's a huge rarity. And not a lot of men, period, have the willpower, let alone the conviction to maintain that. I remember being at the gym as when I was competing in bodybuilding. I used to like pray to God every time girls are coming in. I'm like, dear Lord, keep my mind and my heart pure, Lord, and my eyes on you. And I would just repeat that over and over again until the temptation,
The gym's definitely rough.
I bet.
Yeah.
Especially you're in Florida.
Yeah.
It's real rough.
It's it's an interesting place. And and also coming from small town like Midwest America and then moving to Florida, like hearing, like I became friends with some people or some girls at the gym and stuff, very beautiful girls, and just hearing their like lifestyles and like what's going on here, it's another world. Like the sugar daddy thing is just super common. Didn't even exist where I'm from.
That didn't exist like when I was in school. Like,
Yeah.
I never even heard of like a sugar daddy until like maybe 5-10 years ago. About 5 years ago, actually.
Yeah. So it's definitely a different world here. And yeah, I can see where it'll be tough for Christian men here to find like a girl that doesn't have quite a past, I think.
And I think you're right for that. Like, you're saying, hey, I'm keeping my purity intact. As difficult as it is, I'm a guy. I have testosterone. I have 17 times more testosterone than you ladies do. And if I'm able to maintain my purity, then I expect my bride to be able to maintain her purity.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, logically, it makes complete sense to have that expectation. But then it's like, well, if I'm only gonna like pursue virgins, it's like there's like 10 of them in the country. It seems like
You're maybe about 12 max.
maybe 12. Yeah,
Depends if they're Mormon, because they do some other weird stuff,
yeah,
like soaking, and they don't count that as sex. So
yeah.
you gotta be careful for those. What is like? I remember. So my fiance, who I'm with now, I remember the first thing that I told her is like, if we ever gonna be serious, like we gotta be equally yoked. And she didn't really understand that, and I had to explain it to her. Do you find that hard when dating women, or even just like, not dating, but just getting to know girls? Like, do you find them not really equally yoked?
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about that, and since like I'm only going to date a girl that's Christian, so that's going to be the first part of the equally yoked. But then it's kind of like a question of spiritual maturity, like where do they need to fall on the scale? And I'm more lenient on that because I basically view it as if the girl has a legitimate relationship with Jesus. It's not like something tradition they picked up from their parents, or they just view it as an honest, legitimate relationship. Like if they're not fully there spiritual maturity, then I'm not too worried about that because it's my role to lead anyway. So I'm lenient on that if I see the relationship with Jesus is authentic. And there's a few different ways I like to try to get at that kind of early so I don't waste my time. Like one question, if I am using the apps, and actually a bunch of us guys are not using apps right now. We have a challenge going on. But I will ask the girl I'll
No
ask
Christian mingle?
no Christian mingles or anything. Um, I'll ask the girl if she only had one question to ask a man before deciding to go on a date, what would it be? And you can see the real Christian girls in that question because they will ask about the relationship with Jesus. Like, explain, tell me about your relationship with Jesus, or like, how important is it to you? Stuff like that. They're going to ask that question. That's what I'm looking for. And then if they don't ask that, I will, obviously a lot of times return that question to me, and then I will ask them how important is their relationship with Jesus. And I just want to see how they just respond to that. If it freaks them out, some of them, that's what I want it to do, and they can leave. But
Yeah, it's a way to vet them, right? You're
yeah.
vetting them. It's a quick process to vet them out.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the options. So what about spinning plates? How do you understand spinning plates, and how are you able to reconcile that? Because the way I see it now, I'm in a relationship, but if I was single and if I was saying, okay, spinning plates as a Christian, one, you don't have to sleep with all your plates.
Right.
Okay.
We actually we filmed one on that about 2 weeks ago, that spinning plates topic, because we're still trying to figure out the answers to that.
Well, it's like, the way I look at it is like, you're not exclusive to anybody. You're still kind of sorting through your options, right? So
Yeah.
let's say, Mike, you had like 7 girls that were interested in you. Well, you're not going to just try one at a time,
Yeah.
right? You're not exclusive to any of them. You're going to go on a date with all of them and get to know them. And the ones that you vet through, maybe they're not really where you want them to be spiritually, so they kind of fall off, right?
Mhm.
Or you kind of let them go. And the ones that you got your maybe your top 4, and you're just kind of getting to know all of them. You're telling them up front, like, hey, we are not dating, we're getting to know each other, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I think so with that concept, I was thinking about it because it's when you're looking for a wife in the like kind of unicorn sense, guys like me are looking for, spinning plates is not really a much of a thing, just because there's not a high volume of those girls to even just date through. Like, you're dealing with such a kind of rare girl that if you got 3 of them in your grasp, like, oh my word, that's that's crazy.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah,
that concept more, it applies much easier. Like, if I were to open up my filter and just start dating kind of secular girls or anything, then all of a sudden, yeah, there's gonna be a lot more opportunity to spin plates. But I've rarely seen it amongst me or my friends, in where that's a thing, and it's just short-lived thing. And
do you
frankly,
think
I
it's
don't
like,
like dealing with it. Like, trying to deal with how flaky girls are today, and like trying to just deal with 3, 4 of them at a time, even though it's not like, it just sounds like a headache. Sounds expensive. Like,
sounds like a headache. Now, the reason why you don't have to spin plates so much, or you don't spin plates per se, is, well, because there's not a lot of girls that actually meet the standard
yeah,
that you have. So
yeah,
you're lucky if you find 1 or 2 that actually meet that
oh
standard
yeah,
around the same time, right? Like, so it's you're able to, you really don't have the it's not you don't have the option
hmm,
because of your standard. And without you watering down your standard, that would be the only way you get that option.
the
And
girls definitely have the options. My goodness,
oh yeah,
even the Christian girls do, because there's a lot of like, that's the thing. I'm always like, they complain about a lack of Christian men, but man, I seem to meet them at the gym all the time. Like, my whole friend group, like, there's more. That's the problem. You do have it's like an anecdotal confirmation bias, but I like some of the female friends I have, they've told me about their dating experience, and man, they can spin plates kind of easily.
well, they
Even from
naturally do, don't they? I mean, girls
yeah,
naturally spin plates.
right. But
No.
what I'm saying is they don't have the problem of lack of quality options, I would say,
Yeah,
that maybe the guys do.
yeah.
Um, the other problem is, I think a lot of their quote quality options, and this is kind of probably a whole nother topic, is I've noticed the quote kind of cookie cutter perfect church man today is kind of feminine, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, he has a man
And
bun, and
yeah, and I
he
think
wears
these
like,
girls don't know what to do with it because they're not really attracted to him. But on paper, he's like kind of what they want.
yeah,
So they get kind of like, you can tell they're in a between a rock and a hard place and kind of what to do.
you know what, and that's why they always like think they could attract the bad boys and then like get the bad boys saved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost like, okay, and that, you know what, that's a great topic. Like, why is the church making feminized men and they're making men to the point that they're unattractive to the females in the church?
Yeah.
And so therefore the women in the church are looking outside the church
Yep.
for this guy that meets their criteria masculine wise, but they now have to sacrifice that the fact that, well, they're not a believer. So, well, I could get him saved. He'll come to church with me, you know, and wouldn't it be
That,
smarter for the church to make masculine men, you know, for the women in their congregation?
yeah, and that's, the girls will try that in their 20s and then they stop trying that when they're about 30. The same timeline as usual. But yeah, I think part of it is because the church is unattractive to men, I would say in general.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I think you hear a lot of times that the congregation is like 70% women.
Yeah.
I think it's just the masculine men leave. So I think it's not only just that they're creating more feminine men, but also that the masculine ones just leave.
Well,
Is
I
my
think they
view.
also like they don't understand Jesus's meekness, you know, because Jesus was he was gentle, he was, you know, soft, you know, he was compassionate, but he also raised hell. I
Yeah.
mean, he had no problem calling people out. I
Yeah.
mean, think of it, he went toe to toe with the Pharisees and called them out every single time. If
Yep.
that's not masculine, I don't know what is. Like, I would say being a coward would be like quietly sheeping away and, you know, deflecting and you know, that's not what he did. You
And
know,
that'd
he
be another thing I'd point out too with some of the Christian girls in the church. They, from talking to a couple, actually somewhat recently, and one of my friends was talking to one too, that there's like, if you think my standards are high, they're looking to date Jesus Christ himself. And that's the other side of it. It's like some of these girls, they expect near perfection out of the dude, and they get turned off by the smallest things so quick that they view as like um, out of bounds from their standpoint. The one I just specifically even asked, like, do you think your standards are like too high or like reasonable even? And she just kind of justified her views, and it's like, well, I think that's also why there's a large amount of single Christian girls too, because of that.
Reduku said something here. You say it like Jesus is the kid on the playground whose dad is a professional fighter. Touch me and you're dead. I mean, in a way, I mean, don't want to mess up with the Son of God, right? Um, you know, it's funny because when my experience with church girls, let me just say this, Mike. The thing about pastors' daughters, the rumor, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. They're the worst. No, I'm not kidding. I'm just kidding. No, but the ones that I ran into happened to be the most promiscuous
Hmm.
per se, and it really was odd, right? Like it was really odd because, like, man, you're the daughter of the pastor, and now when I look back at it, and it kind of speaks to his leadership. When I think
Yeah.
back about those pastors, not saying they weren't bad pastors, they were very good, you know, very, very nice pastors, but they were just like every other pastor these days that are very critical of men and choose not to teach their women, let alone their daughters, you know, how to navigate their walk with Christ. And I find that really interesting. Do you find that interest like in your area, like that churches tend to only really speak to half the population of the congregation?
Yeah, I think it's, the ones I grew up with is hard to know because I was a kid and teenager, and I actually hated church growing up. So I don't know what they were talking about. But as probably in my 20s, I would say, yeah, it's kind of definitely what I noticed. You kind of get one side. One side gets held accountable, the other side kind of gets praised. You could say. And in regards to the pastor's daughter thing too, I always really find that interesting because I did grow up in the church I grew up with had two great pastors, and they had big families, and like they didn't even have one black sheep in their family. And then I look around like at some of these other pastor families, I'm like, what happened? And like, so I'm like, what is the difference in their leadership capabilities? I'm wondering if sometimes they just get overwhelmed with the church and their kids kind of get neglected, and then that's the result, or what. But it's definitely an interesting because it's like a stereotype that often rings so true.
Yeah, because I knew a pastor, like he pastored two churches in Santa Barbara. And when I graduated and I was in the ministry, uh he was actually the first pastor that reached out to me and is like, "Hey, I want you to come speak at both my churches." And I was like living in Washington at the time. So I came back to California and I did a sermon on judgment, right? And not being judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the perfect day for it too, because now I'm heavily tattooed from like the neck down, right? And I'm sitting in the front row, and I got to the first church. The first church was in Santa Barbara. The second church was in Oxnard. So it's about like a 45-minute drive, right? And so I do the first church, and then I'm ending the first church, and I'm driving to Oxnard to get to the second service, which starts a little bit later. But so by the time I get there, worship is just the music part of worship is just starting to end, right? They're getting ready to do communion. And I'm sitting I get to the front row, because I wasn't going to sit in the back and then have to walk all the way up to the front, right? So I get to the front row. The pastor's up there and he's doing announcements and stuff, and he's getting ready to do communion. And now I just took communion at the other church. So this guy comes up to me, he's like, "Hey man, go up there and get communion. It's okay." And I was like, "No, bro, it's cool. I already did. I'm good." He goes, "No, no, no, no." And he's trying to explain to me what communion is, as if I don't know. And he had no idea who I was. And and he didn't no idea that I was like the guest speaker there. And he thought like I was just this tattooed guy off the street, just coming in finding Jesus for the first time. And then I end up preaching about don't be judgmental to people, and it was hilarious because he looks down, he goes like, "Oh man, this guy's the guest speaker." I just try to get him. But what I was telling about the pastor is that he had 5 kids, and 2 of his kids that were closer to my age wild out. One was a radio DJ throwing like parties, at strip clubs and all kinds of stuff. And the other one was a musician who actually ended up coming back to church later on in life. But I always thought it was weird that pastors' kids seem to, veer off. And do you think it's because like they don't get to experience the world for themselves and they have to kind of go through this prodigal son thing?
I don't know exactly because the ones I grew up around didn't do that. So I didn't really get to I didn't see that happen. So I only can like assess from afar.
Like, do you know anybody that kind of went through the prodigal son journey?
Yeah, I would say even like the other guys a bunch of guys in our group kind of did that. And part of that I think is just not like if you grow up in the in church, but a lot of times you're just living your parents' religion essentially until you're late high school or whatever, and then you start thinking for yourself. And depending on where you're at in culture and your friends, you might get pulled all sorts of directions. For me at that time, I got into like this great small group for young men at like late high school, and then I got really kind of nerded out on Christian apologetics,
Oh
and that
yeah.
kind of like solidified my faith then, and I would say it became my own at that time.
I didn't
Whereas,
get into apologetics till I went to college, man,
yeah,
and I was nerding out hardcore on apologetics. That's awesome.
yeah, and so I think, you know, if you miss that part and then you just kind of go off to college and you don't have that firm foundation, like who knows where you're going, and you know.
Would what would you say, like, from a biblical understanding, what would you say is like the main reason why marriages are like dealing with as much divorce as they are now?
Well, one question would be, is the current divorce rate, is it reflected, like, because we had no fault divorce
Mhm.
change. What is that? Like, I don't even
That was in
remember.
the, I think it was in the 70s,
Yeah.
right?
So would the divorce rate before then been basically equal to today? You know, that's a question that we don't really know.
Well, we know that, like, what we do know is that the divorce rate since no fault increased dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the 80s or like late 80s, early 90s or something like that had the highest, you
Yeah.
know, divorce rate, and it kind of trickled down a little bit. And you know, it's still been on the decline,
But I
but
think that's also because the marriage rates are on such a decline.
it's all, yeah, nobody's getting married either. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're not getting as many divorces, but you're also not getting people getting married anymore.
Well,
What would you say is like a factor that plays into that?
my perspective, you know, obviously I'm young, not married, and haven't been married, so it's hard for me to fully weigh in on it. But from my view, it's the change of, and this started well before the 70s, of what the purpose of marriage, I'd say, changed. Became it, kind of more of like an economic slash survival thing, where you're in this as a team, you know, raise family, whatnot, to something that's all kind of based on romantic love and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we're not going to maintain romantic love as Disney movies are, and happiness all throughout the marriage. So I think that's, in my view, part of the big reason. And I think, you know, even reading Rollo's, I was reading an article that he wrote on the National Mail about romantic love versus, what was the other term? He kind of had two umbrella terms that
Yeah, I had
before
romantic love.
marriage, before was the, let's just say, the umbrella term, and underneath marriage you would fall romantic love and sex, essentially.
Yeah.
And then now romantic love's the umbrella term that marriage and sex falls underneath. And so like the order of operation has kind of flipped, and our priorities have flipped. So I think that's, in my view, a big reason behind it, because we're basing everything so much on emotions, and
Yeah,
those fleeting.
I think it's multifaceted.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, in all honesty, I think, you know, for the longest time, the church influenced culture, and now culture has influenced church.
yeah. Very good point.
And I think that has played a role. Um, I I hear the church preaching about marriage, but they're not preaching. They're preaching to men about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear a sermon in church that tends to be talking about marriage and the roles, you know, I hear them going through Ephesians, and they'll start with, you know, 5:21, where it says you both be submitting to one another, right? They'll skip over 22
Yeah,
until they get to 25.
they'll read it, but they just won't stop on it.
They will barely read it. If they read it anything, they read it like, wives submit to your husbands, and husbands love your wives as Christ
Mhm.
loved the church. And I get that. I get that men need to know how to love their wives and understand what that means. But if you're not preaching the other part of the scriptures, and you're making it seem more of an option rather than a commandment.
Or it'll be an option if he lives up to his standard.
or if he lives up to your standards.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, ladies, you don't have to submit to him if he doesn't live up to your standards. Says who? If you don't think he's the godly man, he's not being, godly man, then you don't have to live up to his standards. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that.
Right.
The thing that I see is like, we see the role switching. See, we have men are supposed to love their wives. That's Christ loved the church. They're supposed to protect, provide, and be willing to sacrifice his life for his bride. Right?
Right.
That's what a husband's supposed to do. And wives are supposed to submit and respect their husbands. Right? As husbands are the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Right? There's an order there. There's a hierarchy, and there's an order that God put in place that's not there anymore. What we're seeing now, in my opinion, is we're seeing more husbands submitting and respecting their wives, and wives loving their husbands. And that means wives being more of the provider, wives being more of the authority figure, right? And so when things don't work out, they point back to the husband. Well, I was only leading. I was only doing this because you weren't stepping up. So do you think that men are not being taught how to step up and be that man?
Well, it's the, blue pill day one condition we get as men in this society. So it's not even that we're not being taught. It's just not really a part of society in general. Like, if you think of any TV show you watch, do you see a masculine man ever hold one that's leading his family, like holding frame and everything, like in a TV show? No. Usually the dad's kind of the buffoon and we laugh at him. And so it's just like it's a societal level difference, or like programming that we're receiving as men. And so of course they're going into relationships like with no idea what they're doing. And then the church itself, like, where when you have years of kind of that same mentality going on with the church, like the new pastors and stuff, they're all in that mentality. So it's like, how do you reset it? And that's, the hard question.
Well, the new pastors themselves are not masculine. So of course they're not going to be preaching about a masculine man when they don't even resemble that masculine man. Because if by having to acknowledge that men are supposed to be masculine, right, then they are acknowledging that they fall short publicly, and I don't think they ever really want to do that, so it's beneficial to them to not promote that, right?
Yeah, and I don't know what the answer is. I think you're seeing the symptoms though. You're seeing the low church attendance for men. It's just an environment that's not conducive to men being men in the way that I would say should be. And where does that lead long term, or what are the answers? Like, part of it is there's an accountability aspect of men because we allowed this domino effect to happen. And then it's like, okay, how do you get out of it? From a church-wide level. And it's like, well, do you just start new churches? Do you go into the church and try to take leadership? Like, what's the answer? And that's the hard thing. Fortunately, church isn't just the church or like the physical church we go to. It is the podcasts online. It is like there's other ways to get the information out there. And I think these conversations like we're having now just need to be had. And spark some thoughts, some change.
I found like the Bible talks about wives submitting to their husbands not just one time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in Colossians,
Corinthians,
it's in Peter, it's in Ephesians. I mean, it's sprinkled throughout every time that it's talking about the order of relationships.
The one thing you'll notice too is it says that first. It doesn't say submit under these if he's meeting these requirements. And I listened to one of our connections podcast had on this, her channel or her Instagram, I think is called Don't Become Roommates. Anyway, this lady, I think she's in her 50s, and she like helps, like, say, women be feminine women and good wives is her kind of mission. And she talked a lot about that. Like, it says to us women to submit to our husbands first. It's the first thing it says. It doesn't say like under certain conditions. Like, and that was one of the big things she was pointing out, which I thought was great.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think it's also hard for them at the same time, because you have to go back to, Genesis 3:16.
Yeah.
The desire for your husband, but he will rule over you.
Mm-hmm.
And just for those that are hearing that, when it says the desire for your husband, but he will rule over you, it's not a good thing. Okay, you're like, well, wait a minute. Wouldn't guys want their wives to desire them? Yes, but the way that it's written, it's in the same context that it's written in Genesis 4. I think it's when Cain is dealing with temptation, and God tells Cain, like, hey, like the enemy desires you.
Yeah, and there's a few different I was digging into that verse probably like 3 weeks ago, and
Did you ever use the New Living Translation interpretation of it?
I mean, I was looking at a bunch of them, but the ESV is the most interesting, I think, because it says your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you.
Well, if you look up, go to the New Living Translation of that verse. Your desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. That's what it says.
You will desire to. Okay, it's the same thing. Yeah, yeah. So
it gets it's a little crazy. And I think that's what it is, though. I think that we're not equipping men in the
even
church.
Understand that reality. Like, we need to be told that. There's so many things we're not told when we're young. Number one is men on how to lead and vet and just be that man for women. But also women are just not told anything either about what men are looking for, what what it means to like give away your purity to a bunch of guys, like, on how that's going to affect your future. Like, they're all got this programming, like, okay, yeah, Jesus forgives, of course, and morally that's the thing, but relationally we have attraction differences. And guess what? Like, if you have a ridiculous past, yes, you're forgiven, but that doesn't mean men are going to find that attractive. And these things are not like told to young people, and it should be.
It's like, yeah, you may be forgiven for your hoish ways, but that doesn't mean I have to marry you.
Right. And yeah, it should be like it. I don't know why we're not telling the youth that. Instead, they sell purity to the youth in, like, I would say, such the wrong, like, it's just it almost encourages them probably to not do it, because it's just sold as like kind of like, don't break this rule. And
it's like, here's a ring.
Yeah.
Here's your purity ring. Don't do anything.
They don't get explained why, or the repercussions, or like the only repercussion they're told is like, yeah, you might have a kid. Like, okay, there's a lot more than that.
They don't talk about soul ties. They don't talk about, like, what you're giving away. And like, because I mean, basically, from a biblical standpoint, as soon as you end up having sex with somebody, you guys are one flesh.
Almost like, I guess you could, in some circle, like, say you're married, like
you are in a sense, because that's that activity was preserved for marriage. So once you do that, you have this soul tie with this individual. And it's like, from a biblical standpoint, if you have multiple partners, and here's like the high body count for Christians, right? Here we go. So if the whole pair bonding thing isn't like done scientifically, if you're not going to accept it scientifically, understand it spiritually. Like, if you have all these like high body counts, you have all these partners, right? That's all these different soul ties that you have to break. You have to seek forgiveness for, and realize that you have all these different soul ties with these people. So when you get married, you're bringing all these different soul ties with you into your relationship that you have not got rid of yet.
Yeah, and there's like, I think about that concept. Rollo has the alpha widow, so it doesn't even always matter the number. Like if you got the alpha widow concept, and she's got that in her brain, like there's just so many potential downsides there. But I was thinking to be interesting, let's talk more about how do men maintain, the celibacy thing today? Because I was thinking more about
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Because I realized there's like I think there's quite a few guys in our group that are like now on board with that weren't, and I think it's a lot harder for men who that was never on their radar, and now it is.
yeah.
Because
So like, what do you say to those guys though? Here's the thing, like, because it's easier for you. I would
Mhm,
say it's easier for somebody that has
yeah,
never done that, has never tasted that temptation,
right.
right? If you don't know what it tastes like, then you don't know what you're staying away from. But a guy that has experienced it, how do we get him to practice celibacy?
Well, they gotta want to at the beginning, and I think from my experience with the guys in our group, they want to practice it, and they just don't know how to do it from a boundary standpoint, and I think that's where the questions come in. And there, like, I obviously don't know because I'm not in the circumstance, but I think if you if you've been there, done that, you're gonna have to have stricter boundaries actually than someone like me, because I think your brain's gonna go from 0 to 100 on that way easier. Whereas, like for me, I think it's easier to control because it's just I haven't crossed that line. So unfortunately, like I think some of like you got to know yourself and realize like where you need to be honestly setting boundaries in your relationship to maintain that. I think about guy like setting like a boundary on just like e- even making out with some chick. Like I'm sure most guys like they don't want to just do that without that progressing further. So then where's your boundary going to be there? Like I don't know the answers on this. It's going to be different for each one individually, but it's it's tough today, especially
Well,
when
it's
the
like
girls
it's a temptation, right? Like Paul says, like, what may tempt you may not be my temptation.
right.
But I'm
You
not
got
going
to
to
know
do it in front
yourself.
of you so you don't, I'm not going to try to cause you to sin. I'm not going to be a stumbling block for you. Right. So it's to each is their, like, not to each their own, but like it's up to each one's own level of resistance of temptation. Right.
Hmm.
And they have to be honest with themselves.
Right. You got to be
And
honest with yourself too. Like if you got alcohol involved too, you need to have
yeah.
different boundaries. And also if you're going to repeat something, like I even know for myself, I've realized boundaries like, okay, that was fine for that one time, but if I did that a lot with her, like boundaries, we're gonna go right past those boundaries at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's nuanced, and I think you're gonna have to be. I think communication with her will be very important too, and she's got to be aligned with you on that. If she's not, if she's just signing up for it, kind of like, oh, I'll deal with his convictions on that, like you need to have her helping put the brakes on too. So
Yeah.
she's got to be aligned with you on that.
Yeah. I think women wouldn't, I don't think modern women, even women in the church, would really understand how to deal with the guy that doesn't try to push things, right? That's
Yeah.
not trying to escalate things
Yeah.
and take things further. Like they're probably gonna think that,
Hmm.
are you gay? Like,
Oh, I know. It's
right,
And I've had
um,
that conversation with women too, because I've explained like, especially if they're kind of doing the prodigal daughter thing, like women who haven't really dated a Christian man who's serious about that, like they're not like their experience with us is gonna be different. Because I think how a man pursues a woman when sex is on his mind in the short term versus not are kind of two different experiences. And I think most of the women are used to being pursued by a guy who has sex on his mind in the short term. And so they're not going to understand, they're not, that's just something they're going to have to experience. They're not going to be kind of prepared for the difference. Um, and there's just, there's subtleties. I don't really know how to explain it, but I just know how I would probably change in my pursuit if sex was in my mind in the short term versus not, or versus what I do now.
well,
So,
let's give some like red pill let's give some Christian red pill tips for guys that want to practice. You know, they want to date women, they want to get to know women, and you know, they want to have a relationship, but be able to experience genuine desire without sex.
Right. And that right there is something I want to talk to Rolo about sometime, is understanding genuine desire without sex involved. Because
Yeah.
that's the question. I don't know I don't know that
Well,
answer.
is it sex involved period, or like without it being sexual, like genuine desire outside of the sexual understanding of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
Because
don't know that answer.
I can say I experienced genuine desire outside of sex with my fiance now. When I
Mm-hmm.
told her, I was like, look, if you want us to be in a relationship, you got to move to California. And mind you, she had a house in Washington. She had a good career going on, and she sold everything. And 2 weeks later, she was here.
Wow.
And that had
Well,
nothing to do with
yeah.
that was not a non-sexual act of genuine desire displayed, right?
100%.
You know, of course we had sex, but you know, and I'm not as good as you, Mike. I'm not as good as you. I'm working on it.
Hey man, I encourage it.
But
Try it out.
I've been very celibate lately. She's in Washington right now, taking care of her mom. But for like the last 6 months. But you know, that to me was an act of genuine desire that had nothing to do with sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like that desire to, like, you know what, fine, I will sell everything and I will move to where he's at because I want to be with him. I want a relationship with him. That to me was an example of genuine desire outside of sex.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think even in the dating process, when you see her, what level of effort is she putting in?
Yeah.
I think you'll be able to see that. Is she making the longer drives, or you know, what effort is she putting in to make sure she sees you? You know, even if she's quote potentially busy, is she dropping plans and stuff. Like, I think you can. There's cues you can pick up on.
Here's a question. A guy named Kyle Simmons asked. What do you think? It says, so the church teaches Philemon doesn't condone slavery because it's contextual to the era. That's what he meant to say, is era and society. Can you discuss for and against why that cannot be similarly applied to marriage and sex?
I'd probably say, you know, because I've dug into this myself, because I think in the Old Testament, I'm not sure there's a biblical case for actually sex outside of marriage being a sin. Seems like adultery is the stated problem in the Old Testament. And then it even lists a bunch of sins. I think it's in Leviticus. I was digging into this. And so it seems to be a little bit different in the Old Testament versus the New Testament. Now, the New Testament, it uses, because I was trying to look up the Greek on this too. And, you know, I'm a layman here talking about this, so go fact check me on this stuff. But Paul uses specifically the term fornication, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas the Old Testament doesn't use that term.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like with many other things in the New Testament, the standards changed with Jesus. Like Jesus corrected divorce, you know.
Well, he corrected divorce and he corrected adultery too.
Yeah. And
So,
I mean, he corrected just sin being in the mind versus the action.
So that's where I would kind of say where this goes, right? If Jesus says, even if you think of a woman in that sexual way and she's not your wife, you've committed adultery, right?
And even that stage, because you got, what is the definition of adultery? It's not fornication.
I think it's giving something or taking something from someone that's not yours. If
Well,
you really look at it,
the Hebrew definition really, because we dug into this because it is interesting. It is specifically instead of me trying to, I'm going to do Hebrew definition. I want to butcher it, make sure I'm right here.
Yeah,
So
I just gave my own understanding of it. Like the best way I could say it in layman's terms is like.
So the mitzvah, which is is interpreted to refer sexual relations between a man and a married woman. So the term, so that's what's kind of interesting about Jesus in that topic, because it's a married woman specifically, and there's differentiation between using that term adultery and fornication in the Old Testament, or I mean in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, that could be debated as far as what Jesus is talking about there. But I think Paul makes pretty clear with fornication. And when you go dig into the definition of that, and I think in the Greek, it is sex outside of marriage. So I don't know if I'd really apply that whole slavery similar context. I think that's a little bit of apples and oranges comparison. But
I think he's trying to use the principle of it. Like, okay, it's the principle of slavery. And then now the principle of sex outside of marriage or sex in marriage. Like, does the principle still apply?
Right. And I would agree that the context of how relationships are done is completely different. Like, frankly, maintaining that moral position is much harder today, I'm guessing, than back then, because you didn't have this year-long dating period of interacting with her in a romantic sense that just tempts you over and over and over again. Whereas back then, it seems like that the concept of dating just didn't even exist.
No, it didn't exist. Like, I mean, the guy would go to the father, "Hey, I want to marry your daughter.
Reporting.
Okay, come back in a year. Let me see if you have your things together." Like the man had to go out and prove himself and build a home and build something that was worthy of bringing her to. So the father could feel comfortable with giving her his daughter's hand. There was a criteria. Was it who was it that worked it off like years?
Rachel or no,
Jacob.
Yeah.
Jacob, right?
Then he got the wrong girl.
He got drunk and he got the wrong daughter.
Then he made him work another 7 years.
Yep. And then he finally got the daughter that he wanted. But and that must have been rough. He had to consummate that marriage, knowing that's not the one that you wanted to be with. Whew. That would have been rough. Yeah, wrong girl.
Yeah. Well, I suppose he's not too upset. He gets 2 wives, maybe. I don't know if they're both.
So then you look at that, right? Because then here's a perfect topic, right? Guys in the red pill space say alphas are able to cheat or have multiple women, and
they'll refer to the Bible for that logic, but then not actually refer. They'll refer to Solomon having all these wives, stuff, but then they don't actually take the steps to make there's specific rules around having multiple wives in both Islam and Christianity, or in I guess Judaism at that time. Like, they had to be treated equally. Guess what? You had to marry him, and you're lifelong committed to them. It's not having a main girl and side girls. Like,
no, it was
2 different things.
And there was a criteria in how the wives were acquired too. If your brother died, right?
Yeah, that was one way.
You had to take on his wife. You had to bring his wife, and you had to take care of her. That was a thing. For your family bloodline. That was a thing. But I don't know if it was more cultural.
Well, I think it was probably happened a lot out of necessity too, because you think, in those days, that is true survival back then. So it's like, well, do I, you're a woman, you want children. Do I go be one of the 20 wives of this king's, and I get to live kind of in luxury of the time and have children in a good scenario, and I guess I have to share him sexually? Or do I marry some peasant, and we might not even be able to survive the winter? Like, I think it was a much different era in raising children. And then you had the aspect of war. Like, I'm sure the gender imbalances were very common there, where you just had way too many women because the men all died.
Absolutely. Guys are going to battle all the time. Kyle said something else. He said he's going to convert to Islam now. Oh, forget William Lane Craig, Takedown of Islam and Convert. I want 4. Oh man.
I like William. Shout out to William Lane Craig. Like he's where I learned, or I dug into apologetics. I think Reasonable Faith
Really?
is probably my favorite place for that.
No, he's good. He's good. You know, I think I look at it like this. Jesus clarifies it from when he comes out, he goes, he always points to one wife. He never says wives. He never says wives. He said in the beginning, man left his mother and father and cling to his wife, and the two became one flesh. That's it.
Yeah.
That explains exactly what it is. Okay. Now, to say that those relationships that had multiple wives weren't blessed, they were, but it wasn't ideal. It wasn't according to the way God designed marriage to be. And look at everybody that had multiple wives. They all had multiple conflicts. Abraham had, the handmaiden, if you want to call her that,
Right.
and that caused a whole problem.
I think my question for God would be, though, like, it would be nice if the male brain was wired like the female brain, in the sense of, like, when we got that wife, like, we're content. Like, I think that would be the nice part.
Here's the thing. I don't know if it's so much guys' brains are not wired like that. If it's that modern, like nowadays, women, or not even nowadays, but women have this. Okay, women must have been cutting off their men back in the biblical days. All right, back in the Corinthian times, women were curving their guys, telling them no and stuff like that, because Paul had to write about it. So It had to be important. It had to be something that was going on then as well, to the point where Paul had to write about it in Corinthians. So I think it's something that, maybe if guys had unlimited access to sex with their wife and her desiring to offer that, not just
that'd be my big pushback on that, because I always hear about the duty part of that from Corinthians, and I'm like, do you want to have sex with a woman who's doing it out of duty and not desire?
Well, is she supposed to maintain her desire for you?
Well, I'm just saying, from you as the guy, do you want to be sleeping with a girl who's just doing it out of duty?
Oh no, absolutely.
Exactly. And so the desire part, I think you as a guy got to maintain. I think that's part of, why the red pill preaches some great stuff on maintaining that desire. And part of that is keeping your frame. Part of that is, the concept of competition anxiety, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one way that guys can maintain that desire is maintain working on themselves and always improving, maintaining that physical physique that, that she found attractive, and leveling up, right? Constantly leveling up. And trust me, this may sound weird, but I know Christian girls that say, like, look, a guy that knows the Bible and has a good relationship with God is sexy. I've heard women say that. I have heard women say that. And it's because they find that security, knowing that guy knows where he stands, So I think guys are not able to, if they were able to maintain that, I think they would be able to maintain their wife's desire to a degree.
Yeah.
Also, implementing dread and, things of that, like that are red pill, points and stuff. I think that's critical. And I think you could do it from a biblical standpoint, without being manipulative or controlling, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, how do you think dread works from a Christian worldview? That's a good
I don't know the answer to that one. I also haven't dug too deep into that topic.
Because I don't know. I still don't know how that operates. Like, because you can't do anything intention. I mean, you are supposed to do something intentional with dread, but how? Like, I think look at it as like, okay, maybe if she's misbehaving and you withdraw and you start dedicating your time elsewhere until she kind of gets the point, maybe that's enough dread without saying where you're going or doing anything like that. You're allowing her to be curious. Maybe that's okay.
Yeah. I think it's going to be so nuanced in each circumstance.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the end, it comes down to women. Like, if like, what's Rollo's phrase? Women want the guy that every guy wants to be and every girl wants to fuck.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. Like, I think if you can kind of live that mantra and be attractive, like that your wife or your girlfriend sees that you are attractive to other women, that's just going to make her more attractive to you. You don't have to, you're not enacting on it. You're not pursuing other girls. You're not flirting with them, but just the fact that you're attractive to other girls, I think, is going to be key to some extent.
Kyle says something here is pretty funny. Good one too. Dread, act like you don't care. Jesus said in heaven we aren't married or unmarried. She wants to be married. Act like you don't.
Hey, it's true. I've had that discussion
Yeah.
too on like marriage is a temporary thing.
Yeah. It's for here on this earth. And Paul says, hey, if you're able to withstand temptation, it's better for you not to be married.
Makes sense too. And I understand, like, we were having that discussion somewhat recently about the Catholics and why they don't allow priests to get married. I kind of get it. Like, when you see, number one, we're talking about the pastor's kids. Imagine trying to run and lead a church, and you got these 5 kids, 3 of them are degenerates that you're trying to deal with. Like, the drama, like, you can't fully devote yourself to your church congregation in that circumstance.
But it also says like father, like leaders of the church are, and it talks about leaders of the church's wives as well. So, that's where it's kind of like in the Bible, it talks about pastors' wives to a degree, like church elders' wives.
Elder, that's the one thing it'd be in, because it specifically calls out the difference between elders and like teachers.
Yeah, it calls them elders, and okay. So let me not take that out of context. A lot of people would look at the word elder, and they would interpret it as leader, church leader.
And that's one with the multiple wife thing. I always kind of took that wrong. He specifically says an elder is supposed to be a man of one wife.
Man of one wife. Yes, that's right. So that kind of tells you like, okay, well, what's an elder? Like, is it literally just like an elder, like a deacon, like an elder of the church, like an older gentleman of the church? Or is it the elder as in like the elder that's leading the church? It could be taken multiple ways, but either way, it permits them to have wives. So the Catholics not having wives, I mean, I understand why, because you're right. Think about how much you can't dedicate your time to when you're having to put time to your wife, time to your kids.
Yeah, I see that so much, like with my own friends, like a couple of them that have kids now, like you don't see them again. You don't see them anymore. And it's like, well, if you're
not
trying
for about
to
10 years, bro.
if you're trying to change,
10 years.
if you're trying to have this huge impact on your church congregation and like, seeking creating disciples, like I can see where a family really is a slowdown potentially in that pursuit. Now, is it reasonable with how our human brains are wired to tell men to not marry? Probably not, but I understand it. I understand the reason behind it.
I almost think it's like if you're saying if you want to do ministry right, then do ministry single, right?
I mean, I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about how do we evangelize the men now? Like, how do we evangelize to men and try to encourage men to find God when the church tends to bash them when they get there? So it's like, look, you need to go to church. Iron sharpens iron. You need to get fed by the word. Oh, but by the way, you're going to get beat while you're there. Like.
And I don't know if I'd say it's like get beat, because I'm just trying to think of like sermons, and it's more of like, I don't think it's maybe on the Father's Day one, or if you go to a men's retreat.
Oh,
But
the Father's Day one is always pretty bad.
yeah,
Right.
I think more so at the modern church they show up to that, it's just more really soft. And so I don't necessarily think they're gonna get beat. But from my experience, I find I am able, my like mission field, I would say, is the gym. Oddly enough, I find it just to be so full of like-minded men, young men in there, and a lot of them, they have already a good discipline, motivated mindset, that like bridging that conversation on the Jesus topic is pretty easy. And a lot of times, like, they're just interested in being around us like-minded men too, and it's just been a good spot for me to talk with men about Jesus.
Yeah, I found the
Outside
same
that,
thing
like,
too. Like when I was competing in bodybuilding, I end up connecting with more Christian bodybuilders than I ever thought I would. Like I knew a couple that were Christians that actually owned a gym, and they actually became my training coaches. And it was great because you hear a lot about like, oh, you're so vain, you care about your looks, blah blah blah,
yeah,
vanity, vanity, vanity. And I found like a good deep core, about maybe 15 to 20 like real deep Christians that were in this sport. And I was like, wow, that's wild. You wouldn't think that.
that comment there, gym saunas is where I learned. So, dude, the gym sauna is where I get all these conversations. Like,
The gym sauna is crazy.
I am
Yeah.
there 5 days a week, and we joke about starting like a podcast called 20 Minutes in the Sauna. You're just like, you have such great conversations in that environment.
But so how do we evangelize men? Like okay, here's a question. How do we evangelize men correctly with the red pill lens? From a biblical worldview with the red pill lens.
For me, it's like, how do you get to the men that are like, because I view probably you and we're surrounded by, I always got to remember this, we're surrounded by not the norm. We're surrounded by the top 10% men, the guys that are at the gym every single day, the motivated ones, the ones that are not overweight. And I feel like reaching those guys, really, it's pretty easy. So the question is, how do we get to the ones that we're not even interacting with, the ones that are just playing video games, for 15 hours on the weekend and smoking weed? Like, where those are the ones that I have the big question mark on, because it's like, how do you even get in contact with them?
And how do you relate to them, right? Because in order to evangelize, you could do the Romans road, you could do a lot of different methods, but unless you have a relationship with them, everything will come off judgmental, right?
And they'll definitely view those of us like that are kind of, we're outliers in our, I would say, motivation and discipline and things. And a lot of people view that annoying, and like they just don't want to deal with you. So it is a bit difficult to bridge those gaps with those types of people. I don't have the answer on reaching those offhand, but what I have seen happen is guys who, like, we have a guy in our group who's just, he's a young kid in college, and he's got kind of a sweet story, because he goes to one of the wokest colleges here, and was just ingrained in that nonsense. Like, said he was thinking about like switching his gender. He's like, half the girls around him are now dudes taking testosterone. It's just a cesspool of mess. And he kind of got like, you could say, red pilled just on every front. Like he just got pulled out of the matrix. And we were there during that, in the front end of that process, and got him in with our group, and he's like a different human being now. And it's so interesting to hear his opinions and things, and hear him talk about how he used to be to now. And I'm like, that's the optimal situation, right? But we were able to reach him in the process of that transition he made on kind of his own. And so it's like you almost got to be there to pick people waking up, pick them up
Yeah.
off the ground.
Like I have this theory and I have this thought. I don't know if it'll work. I haven't really tried it yet. So just hear me out. I like to I love Bible stories. Like one of my tattoos is I have I have Samson on my ribs pulling down the pillars. And see, Samson is one of my favorite Bible stories, and everybody calls him a failure, right?
Yeah.
I don't see him as a failure. Now, he failed. He did. He screwed up. But he still fulfilled his call. His call as a judge was to protect the tribes of Israel, as a judge from the enemy, right? Because that's what the judges did. The judges went to war. They carried the sword. Other than I think it was Deborah, I think, was the only female judge. I think it was Deborah. And she never went to war. She just kind of handled squabbles. But so if you look at Samson, he still did his thing. He still did what he was called to do. Now he repented, like, God, if you give me my strength one more time, I would, I think but that's still him fulfilling his call. If you look at all the Bible heroes, right, they were all flawed, right? David had an affair, but he was known as a man after God's own heart, right? And David was really masculine at times too. You saw David led battles. He won victories, that Saul was even jealous of him. Saul killed thousands. David killed 10,000s. That's what the crowd was cheering, So David was a warrior, and he was a man, and he had his own failures as a man, but he still, I think if you look at David, he was a man after God's own heart. He still had his frame on God. God was still the cornerstone and foundation of everything in his life. And he tried to walk that frame and live that life as best as he could. Yes, he made mistakes. And I think when we look at these Bible heroes, right, we can show these masculine warriors, these heroes, and be like, look at those traits, look at their characteristics as a man. And David didn't want to attack Saul. He respected the authority. He respected the hierarchy, right? Men need to respect above them, the law above them, or the superiors above them, right? That's something that men do, right? There's honor into that. You're honoring that position. You may not like the person, but you're honoring the position. That's something that men do. And I think there's a lot of characteristics and traits that we could look at from these biblical heroes, and we could just kind of compile them together and be like, this is what it is to be a masculine, godly man, having these characteristic traits. And if we do that when we're like in our discipleship, or even when we're working with young guys or guys in general, look at these characteristics of these, Bible heroes. Do you have those? Do you want those? I think we could do that. We don't have to point out the negative, because we all fall short. So none of us are going to be perfect. But we could point out these characteristics of these biblical heroes, and we could use that as a template, as in, this is a masculine, godly man.
Well, their mistakes are like valid. They're good to point out too, because I think it makes them seem human and like you can attain.
Well, I don't want to glorify their mistakes. Is what I'm saying. Like, point out their mistakes, but like, don't say, oh, well, because David, slept with Bathsheba, got to write him off. He's not a good one. Exactly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think one of our kind of something we need to figure out to do better is show, because like we talked about before, I think the impression of the average dude at church is kind of this feminine dude, and it's not something to aspire to be. I think, especially from someone in the secular side of things that didn't grow up in the church, they don't look at the average Christian man and think, "Whoa, I want to be that." And so we kind of want to shift that paradigm and that description on being like, okay, like you, the guys in our group, like these are jacked bodybuilders that are savage looking, and they're after, they got a heart after Jesus as well. Like it's not this, you don't have to be this feminine kind of like lanky dude and wear a man bun and call it a day, being a Christian man.
You don't
Like
need, you don't need to wear capris and show your ankles.
Yeah. So I think that's another side of it, is just redefining what it means to be like, or redefining the average Christian man. Because right now I would say the average Christian man is not someone people aspire to be.
Well, do you think it's like the pendulum has swung on that? Because before, Christian men, you wouldn't really see a whole lot of masculine Christian men lifting up their hands in church while they're praising. They wouldn't be engaged in worship. They'd just be standing there, just saying the words, very monotone, because they could, if they were involved, that was feminine. So do you think it went from too stoic, right? Like they were containing their worship, to like overtly, feminine?
They definitely, I think, how much of that is adapted to make women. It's the old blue pill, adapt to be like a woman. I don't know the answer on that. I think, it's like this, the 30% of men that are in church, what are they? They're kind of more of this feminine, this guy. And I think you find that, we over and over again, I've had the kind of similar conversation at the gym with men that I found out they're Christian men, but they don't really go to church. They don't find it attractive. And, that's unfortunate. And cause you need community. You can't do it alone.
You can't. And it's easy to get lost. It's easy to, I mean, I've struggled with this. It's easy to get dull.
Mm-hmm.
When you're not surrounded by, like-minded Christian men that understand, like, it's easy to surround yourself with Christian men, but they're not going to be red pill aware.
Yeah.
It's really hard when you're a Christian guy and you're red pill aware to be able to surround yourself with like-minded guys, because it's just like the pool is so much smaller,
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things, like you really can't preach the red pill, or like convert people to that mindset. They have to do it themselves. I'm sure we've all experienced that frustrations when you start talking about some red pill truths, like you get this giant pushback and, who hurt you type stuff. And it's like, well, you're not going to naturally find those men. So I don't know what, maybe the answer is like, or many of those men anyway. So maybe the answer is you kind of just got to lead by example, or slowly wake them up. I don't know. But the point is, you got to be in community.
Point it back to the Bible.
Yeah. Well,
for the red, to kind of get Christians that are already Christians to be red pilled, I think it'd be really easy just to point back to the Bible.
Yeah. And that's what I would love. Like, if I had to plot out like something I'd like to do in the next 10 years is write like a Christian perspective book on the red pill, and take like truths from Rollo's work and like, kind of put it side by side with Bibles, or with scripture, stuff like that. Because like some of these people, that they have such a false impression of what it is. And I remember we posted a quote from Rollo's Twitter on our Instagram story, and someone responded like, "What are you doing posting a quote of an atheist?" And I'm like, Rollo's not even.
He's not even an atheist.
He's absolutely not an atheist. And so like, but it's a PR problem. It's a perspective problem that the red pill in and of itself has. And so I think it's got to be, that's what's frustrating, because someone like Ruslan and someone like Hafiz, they have the audience and the understanding of the red pill to make an impact in this area, but they're taking a.
Do they really though? Do they really have an understanding?
Maybe not Ruslan, but I would assume Hafiz does, because he was basically
was, and I think
an RP guy, and then I feel like he switched the moment he got engaged.
Well, I think it suited his. He saw that it suited his bottom line, if
He would actually
proposed
argue
it.
different because he's like, I would get so many more views and so much more money off of making videos like coming down
Really
on
though,
women.
because there's tons of red pill content creators out there, and if you really think about it, only a few of them are making any money, right?
Well,
Any,
Peace was
any
he was doing pretty good, and I know like I'm friends with one of his close friends, and we've talked about this, and he was like thinking Hafiz's problem with the red pill, uh, I believe, and it's hard. I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but from my understanding is, and I partially agree with this, is he thinks a lot of these creators are basically taking advantage, basically monetizing men's red pill rage essentially or
yeah,
frustrations, and because he gave examples of his own videos, like a video basically coming down on women, 5 reasons why blah 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 modern women are like this. It like did huge numbers, and then he does like a video kind of on the opposite topic, or like 5 reasons why to get married today or something. It's just like no views, and so
well,
he just understands the audience is like so into the fresh and fit type
yes, and I think that's
red
a
meat
problem.
culture.
I think that's a huge problem because Fresh and Fit is great about exposing, the modern woman's nature.
Yeah,
Sure,
it's entertainment.
it's great entertainment, but it doesn't give any tools. It gives you tools to vet them out, but and it doesn't give tools for men to attract the right type of girl, though.
Yeah, and it doesn't even show like, I know they take demographics of all the girls they have on now to show that we have a wide range of types of women. They're educated,
Yeah,
some of them OnlyFans girls, whatever. But at the same time, I'm like, the conservative, like quality girls I know, there's not a chance on planet Earth they're going on that podcast.
yeah. Most women that I know that are conservative would never even step foot on that podcast.
Yeah. So you're still getting this giant bias on how women are today through that lens. And, I think Rollo even admits it, like about the show he's got with Sartain, that he's like, the audience doesn't want that girl. They want the ones that they can be basically mad at. So
Yeah,
and that's why I asked that question on that last Rule Zero on like what percentage of men consuming red pill content
oh
are
yeah,
actually like trying to better themselves.
yeah. And I said 20%, and I think everybody else said about 16. And I think
Yeah.
they're right. It's about right. I think that's the right range. And I think when it comes to Hafiz and Ruslan, one, I try to have a conversation with Ruslan, like off
Mhm.
camera. Like I was like, dude, let's just set up a call and we could talk about this. And he blew me off. So I was like, all right. I didn't try with Hafiz because I don't think Hafiz would want to, actually have a conversation either. I think he's kind of set on his position. And I don't know so much if pride would get in the way from them seeing things, because I see things a lot differently than them, and so do you. You know, I don't take everything with the red pill. It's not my worldview. It's not my Bible. It's not what I live my life by.
It's just a useful tool in the
It's
end.
a tool. It's a tool. It gives you wisdom and insight on nature. Now, if you think about female nature and male nature, you could call that the flesh,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
This is how the flesh is operating. This is how the female flesh is operating. Cool. Now you know how to deal with the female flesh as well. From a spiritual standpoint, you know how to deal with it. But now, from a in-person standpoint, you know how to deal with it as well.
It also helps you it helps you understand yourself better too and your own nature.
Exactly. I think like what Ruslan and Hafiz get wrong is they take things that Rollo said out of context or to the extreme, almost kind of like on the spectrum with it. And then there's too many content creators that she's for the streets. you know.
And that's the
Um,
red meat of it, you know. And
yeah,
you know, like what's his name? Rich Cooper calls it the mana swamp now, and I
yeah,
kind of get it. Like there's a lot of garbage in it now, and because it's the new thing. Like I've thought about like why, you know, back to my whole thing of saying the last 3 years something has changed. The last 3 years, this topic on the internet is absolutely exploded.
yeah,
And like every podcast that, you know, I'm not every, but a lot of the podcasts out there that were never talking about relationships are now talking about them. Like you look at like Chris Williamson,
yeah,
he blew up on basically this topic, I would say, because he's
yeah.
had a lot of people on that talk about it. You know, Jedediah Bila, that Rolo's on her show a lot. That's basically all she's talking about now. You
No,
know,
that's all she talks about now. She doesn't talk
yeah,
about anything else.
Valuetainment with Patrick's hat on, you know, Rolo to Fresh and Fit to Andrew Tate. Like every major podcast is kind of bridging this topic now. And it's like, what's going on? Why? And you know, so there's also a lot of grifters in here trying to make money off of
Yeah,
red meat.
and I think we're in a unique place because we kind of like stand in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we understand red pill enough, and we understand the biblical worldview enough, and we could see like, look, there's a bridge here.
Yeah, and
There's
we're
a
kind of
bridge.
dealing in the world of prescriptions in the end. You know, that's kind
Yeah,
of how I view it. It's like the red pill talks about what is, and we're Christians, we're idealistic. We talk about what should be.
exactly.
And we're, you know we're not going to get to what should be, but we're going to sure as heck try to push people in the right direction.
But what we could do is take the tools that the red pill gives us, right, and try to get to what should be in our own lives, right?
Hmm.
We could do the best that we can to get as close to as what should be as possible. And it's kind of almost like you're walking with Christ, right? We're supposed to become Christ-like. Or is anybody going to become Christ-like by the end of the end of their life? No, but why do they still pursue it? Right? It's
Yeah,
like, so in the same,
exactly.
it's the same mentality if you think about it. It's like, yeah, you know, you're never going to get the relationship that what it should be. You know, this is how it is. But you could take the tools from the red pill and work towards what should be in a biblical way, and try to get the best outcome out of
Hmm.
relationships. You
Yep.
know, I think one of Hafiz's biggest issues is marriage and how the red pill views marriage.
Yeah.
You know, and I would agree with him, but I actually don't believe people in the red pill have an issue with marriage.
It's just marriage today in today's culture and
No, I
legal
think their
environment.
issue is with divorce.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's really what it is. Nobody has a problem with marriage. It's what happens when the marriage breaks down.
Hmm. And I also think part of like my friends and I have talked about this kind of offline in Hafiz and Ruslan's thing. It's like it's a little bit of the casting your pearls before swine concept of what they're doing. It's like you're preaching marriage and like Christian values to secular men, essentially, is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, you're putting the cart before the horse in that sense. Like they need to like find Jesus first, and then we can talk about the Christian marriage values and stuff. Because from my perspective, if I was like say an atheist or didn't believe in God, marriage would be kind of last on my radar. Like it would not be of high priority for me. I'd probably be doing as Myron suggests and like because you'd be you know just living your nature out kind of. And so
How should a Christian man approach marriage? I mean, Rolo says we live in a post marriage, you know, society or culture. Um, what do you think?
well, I think it's ultimately, you know, it's the representation of Christ's relationship with the church. So it's of high value. And I
Yeah,
think it's just the road becomes narrower and narrower in today's culture in doing it right. And so I think marriage should be held to the same standard and value as it's always been. It's just we live in a climate where you can't be naive.
yeah,
Um, and I think you gotta use you gotta understand the environment you're in and the commitment you're making. And you know, part of that is it's your responsibility as a man. Number one, you got to lead that relationship and marriage correctly. And number two, like if it goes bad, you probably was on your fault for not vetting her. Like you picked her.
I think that's key right there. I think you're right, because I could look back at my previous marriage. There was a lot of red flags that I ignored, you know. And if I would have, acted on those red flags that I saw, I probably wouldn't have been in the situation that I was in later on in life. But Kyle asked another question. Back to the Philemon question: is it just contextual today? What biblical truth in regards to marriage and sex are true regardless of time and place? For one, I would say that no matter what time or place that we're in, marriage is an illustration of the relationship Christ has with the church. And in the order, and with that being said, that those positions are interchangeable or not interchangeable. Okay, you cannot swap those roles. So a husband's role, if the husband is the representation of Christ's relationship with the church, then that role cannot change. That position, the requirements, the expectations, and the commandments that God has for the husband cannot be interchanged to the wife, and vice versa.
Yep.
So with that being said, that there is no such thing as a biblical egalitarian marriage. You can't have that. That's not biblical, in my opinion. Men and women are equal in value, but different in function.
I'd probably add, as far as biblical truth, is what God's intended purpose for marriage was, like with the creation of Adam and Eve and how that relationship dynamic was intended to be. I think across time, and then how, like Jesus refers to it in the New Testament, and I believe Paul does as well. So I think that being the intended, I would say across time truth is what I would stick to, as far as my view on it. And then, you start asking the questions on polygamy and stuff. Like, was that just a short-term, time in history that it was okay to do? And why did God permit that then? Why is it not okay now? That's a question that we'll probably have to save for God one day and try not to, I've read so much or so many explanations on it, and none of them really satisfy me. And so it's one of those things where I do view it as just a difference of times. Like it was almost like I view it as, if that didn't exist back then, maybe the human race wouldn't even exist right now, just of how survival mode we were years and years ago, and how most men didn't actually reproduce. I think it's like 40% or something.
Yeah.
And in that time frame, I think polygamy was almost necessary, especially with the wars and stuff. Whereas today, as we've gotten richer and richer, and for the most part, the gender breakdown is near 50-50. I mean, Russia and China got some problems, but I think it makes sense. And then we know for a fact polygamous societies are violent. Jordan Peterson always talks about that. Like it leads, like men that don't have access to women, like they just go do dumb stuff.
Well, I mean, the Arab Spring, right?
Yeah.
Look at that as an example. I would also say, when it comes to marriage, we're also going to look at divorce. The standard for divorce has never changed biblically. God has never given other exceptions for divorce. So anybody that gets divorced under no fault is committing a sin, in my opinion. I can't say it's not, because the Bible says if you divorce your wife for any other reason other than adultery, and she goes and remarries, then you have caused her to commit adultery. And if you remarry get with another woman, then you have committed adultery. So, I think anything outside of the biblical definition of grounds for divorce, that we have a lot of adultery.
Yeah.
Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's where today's focus on happiness being kind of the central core of marriage is the problem, and why there's so much divorce. And then you got these circumstances too, and like I'm sure that were never intended to happen, but let's just say one, you get married, you're both beautiful, attractive, and one gains 100 pounds. What's the other one supposed to do? You know?
Yeah, especially when the other one doesn't want to do anything about their weight, right?
Yeah, and so I can see where you get in some of these circumstances. Like, what do you do as a Christian? That's, if I had to be honest, like a fear of mine, because I don't view their acceptability or their being divorce like acceptable reasons. It's like, okay, what am I for sure signing up for here?
Yeah.
There's no out, there's no eject on that.
I think like contracts, like I think, everybody can write a contract, marriage contract, right? And I think like and that's basically a prenup. But I think you should be able to list exactly what you expect from each other. And like
But
you
even
guys
if they break the contract, what's that mean for you can't, you still won't be able to divorce?
no, you wouldn't be able to get a divorce, but like, they have to meet that, right? Like they should be held to that. There should be some in any other contract in this world. If I try to cancel my Verizon cell phone subscription earlier than like my contract,
You got to pay
I
money.
will be penalized.
But
Right?
what do you do? What's the penalty in that situation?
I don't know. Like they got to be something. They got to figure out some form of penalty, right? Like I don't know. Like you have to go to the gym, like regardless. Like there's, I don't know.
Yeah.
There has to be something because right now that's what it is. Like the reason why nobody values marriage is because there's no consequence for breaking it.
There is
Socially, it's
there is for
acceptable.
men, but not the women.
Well, yeah, it's acceptable for women, but it's penalized for men. Even if the man doesn't break the contract and she does, he still gets penalized, right? So there has to be like if I did this thing where I was talking about if I was gonna rewrite the divorce laws, I would say like, look, if you want a divorce and there's no fault, there's no affairs, there's no abuse, no harm of the children in place, and you just want out because you're no longer attracted to them, then you can leave and take whatever you brought with you out, but you don't get to take anything that's for the family because you reneged on your contract, not them, right? I think that's a way to fix it. So you still get to keep no fault in place, but there's no benefit from divorcing when you just want out, that's just my opinion, but I don't know how it's going to work. I just think that the way that we need to view marriage needs to change overall. And we'll wrap it up here soon because we're almost at 2 hours. Wow, that's crazy. The way that we view marriage needs to change, and we need to look at it as the covenant that it is. From a Christian standpoint, that's a covenant. So it's not my promise to God is more important than my promise to her. And
Exactly.
if that means if God has only given me a way out for this situation, right? Well, there's two. Paul gives you one, Jesus gives you one, but really ultimately it's Jesus's, right?
Yep.
Then that's the standard that I have to uphold. My marriage is more important in the covenant and promise that I made to God than it is to her. And I think that's how people need to look at it.
And I think the other thing is people need to, I was just listening to Rollo's Positive Masculinity book. And the big thing that seems to happen, I guess, in marriage is when the kids come, they become a higher priority than the marriage relationship. And that needs to stop. And that is one thing I will say that I noticed the church does do right, is I have heard many churches talk about that topic. Like your relationship is more important than your kids. You need to continue pursuing each other. And so I will give definitely the modern church some kudos on that.
We got one more question from Kyle here, and I think it's a great one. Hey guys, thanks for reading my chats. Got one last question. If I super chat y'all 10% of my gross income, does it count as a tithe? You know what? No, but we'll find the right. We'll find the right church. So
we were looking at doing a 501c, and I don't know. I
you know
don't.
what? I have something. I want to talk with you guys on the back end later on. Because I got approached by somebody that asked me to do something, and I really think it'll be a good collaboration.
Mhm.
You know, for us to do. Remind me to talk to you about that later.
Okay.
Raduku asks, and we'll get a couple of these questions in, and then we'll wrap it up. But Raduku asks, and how does entering into agreement where one party is encouraged to become a tyrant affect the relationship? See, I think that men are allowed to, from a biblical standpoint, to fortify themselves legally when it comes to entering into a relationship, a marriage. Just like in any other contract, you are allowed to protect yourself, right? And I think that prenups are legal. And I don't think there's anything wrong biblically with prenups. They always had stipulations to agreements and contracts back then.
Had
And
dowries involved and stuff in their
yeah,
relationships.
so there was always something that if she could not provide something for him, the husband still gained something, you know. So I think in that sense, there's a ways that I think guys should get, one, write up your own marriage contract. Two, if you are really serious about marriage and you really want to do it, and kind of foolproof it as best as you can, find a state that does covenantal marriages. Covenantal marriages are not your traditional marriage by the state. They actually are a lot harder to get out of. They are very hard to get out of. Um, Arkansas is one of the a few states that does it. I think they're one of the first ones, but it's like you have to have abuse, child abuse, abandonment for 2 years, and adultery. Those are the only 4 like circumstances where you could get out of a covenantal marriage without having to go through 2 years of marriage counseling.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like they have it tight over there. So I mean, if you're serious about marriage and you really want to make it kind of air proof, look into states that have covenantal marriages for one. And two, if you're not in those states, get a lawyer to help you draft up a very good prenup, and try to make it as ironclad as possible. Know that you're going to go into something, and if it goes bad, you're going to sustain some loss, but you could at least limit the loss that you sustain. Just don't go in there blind.
I think everything to remember too is it's a risk. Like it's kind of like if you were to start a business, you got a 90% failure rate. Like if you don't take the risk, so you're not going to have the chance of the success. So, marriage is a risk. If it fails, it's going to hurt. And if it succeeds, you're probably going to have a pretty fulfilled life. So, and then also the red pill concern about like finances and divorce. It's like, well, if you consider what the average guy is, like this is only a concern for like the top 20% of men. The average men.
Well, when it comes
really
to alimony, yeah, but not child support.
Yeah, child support is one thing. But yeah, as far as like handing over a bunch of assets or paying alimony, like that's a small portion of men that got to worry about that.
I think for the majority of guys, it's the child support.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, because I mean, some guys are paying like $1,200 for one kid, and so I think for most of the guys, it's the child support and access to their child is the real problem. Because you're right, because the majority of guys don't even make the money that these girls could actually go after.
Yeah,
and half the time women are making more than these guys.
Exactly.
So I think there's ways to fix marriage. I think there's an approach, and I think there's a good way to do it from a biblical worldview, but also being red pilled and understanding what the risk is As you said, marriage is a risk, but you are never going to achieve the reward of marriage unless you take the risk and you vet her properly and you implement your frame from the very beginning. And, you maintain control of that frame. I think it's, as a man, it is your duty to maintain that frame.
Yes.
As the head of the household, biblically, it is your duty and your responsibility to.
And the real traditional Christian women, they want you to.
Yeah.
And their female nature will come out and try to pull it away, but they're, in the end, they want you to maintain it.
Yeah. And remember the scripture. Her desire would be to rule over you, but you will still rule over her. That's what the Bible says. I mean, so God's word has not returned void yet. So,
yep.
But Mike, I really appreciate this conversation. We got 2 hours.
Yeah, it's awesome. Fun, dude. This topic, I think you could talk forever, and
I know. I was like, we can just keep on going, but I know it's getting late.
There's so many kind of niche topics that you can go down the rabbit hole on, and I think it's good. I think it just shows the void in the Christian community for talking about the red pill and whatnot.
And I think we also get to talk to, we're talking we're sending a different message in the red pill as well. Like, we're not only just talking to, Christian guys that have a negative view of the red pill, but we're also talking to red pill guys that have a negative view of Christianity as well. We're saying like, hey, no, this is what we're talking about.
Yep.
And I think there needs to be more of us having these conversations that are able to blend these things together and see how they could benefit men and families. And I think it's a great conversation. I really appreciate you giving your time today to do this. I can't wait to get the rest of the guys on here. So we have like a full discussion and, let it go for a few hours. But I really appreciate your time today.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you having me on, and this will be an ongoing conversation, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Maybe one of these days we can get Rollo in here and we could just like be back and forth with him. Like, so what do you think about this? What do you think?
Yeah.
I think that'll be a great conversation.
I think there's a lot of good topics to involve him on from the Christian perspective that he can shed some of his opinions on.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you guys that are tuning into the chat, thank you. I appreciate you. Make sure you guys follow Mike if you're not following him already. I mean, like, these guys are awesome. He's part of the Iron Disciples. Catch them on their channel. I believe you said you guys do your pre-records on.
Well, we put out like one podcast a week. When it ends up on YouTube is just kind of.
So
random.
You guys don't have like a scheduled day you guys do it on?
No.
Okay.
We all got very busy lives outside of filming podcasts, so we just kind of try to fit it in as much as we can.
Well, you guys just subscribe to the channel, click the notification so you guys are made aware of when they drop a new podcast. I love watching them. They're great. And they're great insight for young men and men in general. They ask a lot of questions and they're trying to figure this all out, this red pill space, as well as understanding their faith. So I encourage you guys to continue following them if you haven't followed them yet. But until next time, you guys have a good one. Peace.
Peace.